This is a small making of video I started writing for Hooligans and am finishing up while working on Saints Row 2022. It's also a bit of an update to my old making a review video, which I'm not terribly fond of nowadays. This isn't to beat myself up, but I found watching it back it's really unfunny and I'm weirdly dogmatic in it. I take the fact I dislike it now as a good sign since I always want to be advancing. I remember playing The Sims when I was young and I'd always be a bit melancholy when I got to the top of a career chain. My 8-year-old self thought, it's got to be really depressing being a CEO or a prime minister or something of the like, because you've got nowhere else to go. And thoughts like these are why I grew up into a massively unprofitable adult. So let's update and go over what goes into my videos nowadays. It's not perfect to anyone, not even me, which is why down the line it will likely keep changing. This is a snapshot in time. I got comments on the last one saying that it helped a few people, and I hope this one can do much the same. Right off the bat, I don't really consider what I make to be reviews anymore. I should probably update that. I don't really care to be prescriptive with terms like reviews, essays, and what have you. Playing has elements of reviews, but I just sort of stylistically pill for whatever works to get my point across. Essays, analysis, critique. I call what I do playing because it's a fairly loose term and I just found it funny that no one had gotten to such a generic, straightforward name for their series. Personally, I enjoy videos that don't force themselves into a format and instead feel like a journey conforming themselves around the topic. And that's what playing is to me. It is, at its core, playing the game. And so, it can't really be the same thing twice. Obviously, the first step is playing the game itself. I used to take paper notes live during recording, but I have dropped this habit. They created ugly pauses in the footage I'd need to cut around and sort of corrupted the activity of playing a game. Rather than helping my thoughts, they likely muddled them. Not much to say with actually playing the game. Play the game and see what happens. I'm not a 100% kind of guy. I try to clear credits and take a full sampling of what the game has to offer, but 100% just feels like I'd be intentionally ruining most games for myself. I'm not a completionist. I'd rather have fun than be thorough. But I still gotta be thorough enough that I'm at least getting the full picture. My natural playstyle I feel lends well to games coverage. I'm experimental and optimal plays tend to bore me. I tend to follow the fun over what really works. Besides that, I do try to approach the game on its terms. I have biases and these being videos about my experience will colour it, but I want to give whatever I'm playing a fair shake, especially if I intend to make a video on it. I'm a lot smarter about how I name my files nowadays. This is more or less my format, with the in-progress Saints Row as an example. The first part is obviously the game's name and the file number. It belongs to this game and is this recording. The second part in all caps is what mode of game this recording is primarily capturing. If I'm progressing the story, it's story. If I'm doing side hustles, it's side hustles, and so on and so forth. I try not to have too many of these. This system is modified a bit per game, but it works well for most and serves both a creative and practical purpose. It lets me work out in broad terms what modes of play the game features, meanwhile it makes it easier to track this footage down later or skim through it at a glance. Meanwhile, the last part is a little bit more loose. It's anything standout or noteworthy which happened, perhaps an observation or two. Again, makes it easier to track it down when I need it. As the rest of this video probably demonstrates, I've lost the exact footage I've wanted one too many times, and now I do a lot of work to limit that. Nowadays, I'll sometimes write up notes after a recording session if a thought has really taken me. These tend to be my immediate, most primitive evaluations, but are useful for keeping in mind what the game was inspiring at the time of playing, forming an emotional blueprint for the video. Only small bits and pieces of these tend to survive into the final video untouched. These get refined and massaged into my points, or used as the basis for jokes. I also scrutinise these once I finish the game to check for any misconceptions I may have had along the way. I doubt I'll ever make a video that doesn't get at least one thing wrong or miss something worthy of mention, but I try to keep flexible and give myself the best odds. I'll beat myself up over mistakes I've made, but I also think trying to eliminate all of them would lead to nothing ever getting done. I'd rather get a comment telling me I messed something up than never having given that person a juicy opportunity to correct someone. And if I do spot mistakes, that doesn't mean they have to be discarded. Sometimes misunderstandings come from the game doing a poor job conveying something. Other times they come from me failing to pick up on it. It's never 100% one way or the other, so trying to figure out where the fault lies and how it happened can be useful. And I feel like for a playing video they make for a valuable part of the journey. I find stress testing my own assumptions can often wind up helpful and lead down interesting rabbit holes. My proper note-taking nowadays I do in post. I rewatch the recording so I can pause and scrub the video. My format here is pretty straightforward. What I deem important events I'll jot down with a timestamp and typically without comment. Under that, I'll have less important follow-up events, as well as more subjective or unique notes. These may be what I was thinking at the time, jokes which come to mind which I have to later refine, what I learned or failed to learn at that moment, and so on. This combination of an objective log of events and personal observations helps me both write the resulting script by transforming these notes into a semi-coherent and flowing narration, and later edit the video by letting me more easily track down relevant footage. I also started adding tags to my notes. These similarly help with structuring and editing. If a note writes about a fight my units had or a maneuver I made, I'll tag them something like combat or strategy, as it's a broad term and unlikely to be used in the note itself. I don't actually have a great memory, and if I can't recall specifically what I'm after, I can instead use the broad term and quickly search through my notes to find what I'm after. Setting tags like this is not only useful for finding footage, but also really working out what I spent most of the game doing. Again in Hooligans, I thought going in it would mostly be talking about mass melee brawls, but in practice, that was an easy way to a game over, and so strategy, avoidance, and problem solving reveal themselves by quantity to be what most of the game was about. If a note is about an opinion I had on the game, I'll mark it as observation. Control-Fing through these is a nice and quick way to have a log of my feelings moment to moment. I mark every joke I come up with similarly. I get praised a flattering amount on my humour, but that's because my wordplay is a blood sport. A lot of bad gags die on the way to a half-decent one, and some of the bad ones survive just because they're lucky enough that I like them. There's also what I mark as post notes. This is stupid because while they started as notes that I would take in post when I was doing paper notes proper, now everything I note is in post. Anyway, these are pivotal parts of note-taking to me, as they are dry runs at writing proper portions for the actual video and really sorting my thoughts out and getting them on paper. On Notepad. On LibreOffice. Despite their importance, I do not chase after these. I write them when I feel them coming. They're little sparks of inspiration or when pieces connect in my head. When how I feel about a certain topic starts to coalesce, I quickly write up a paragraph or two and mark it down. Funnily enough, they are more or less the next phase of my post-video recording notes, the earliest ones. Only now I've got the full game behind me to mentally work from. At times, these will just be lifted completely and put into the finished script with minimal changes if they're good enough, or remain relevant when scripting proper begins. Though I do work to make them fit the larger puzzle. Note-taking is slow and laborious. I don't enjoy much of it, but I consider it absolutely invaluable. I also used to be weirdly proud of not doing research. I said it kept the video focused squarely on the game, which, well, was horse piss. It was laziness masquerading as earnestness. Nowadays, I do my homework. Not just articles on the game in question, though those are often handy, but relevant real-world topics. I enjoy the rabbit holes these can lead me down. Evo and We, the Revolution, were particularly fun videos for that reason. Evo, I did a little learning on my natural history. We, the Revolution, was obviously the French Revolution. Though I also looked up French sayings and bits and pieces of relevant philosophy to pepper into the video. Learning some real-world context or background information can do more for understanding the resulting title than any developer interview, and it will definitely lend a little texture or chances for extra deep-cut gags to proceedings. Plus, it's just fun to have a little something extra for me and the audience to learn and take away. It's a value add. For Hooligans, while trying to research the casual subculture of England and especially the UK reggae scene of the 70s and 80s, well, it didn't turn up much. I did find out about Aswad, and now I'm rather fond of some of his songs. So, yeah, it's a bit of a bonus. I feel like my videos also involve a weird amount of luck. During Yakuza's 4 and 5, I was in tabletop campaigns which had suspiciously similar plot elements. The Game Master hadn't even played any of these games, so this was really amusing, and playing in a game which had a similar-ish story helped me flesh my own thoughts out quite a lot. During Evo, a friend just happened to show me a Spirit Science video while I was in production, and that curveballed the video. I doubt this part will really help anyone because the advice is more or less just get lucky. But for my own experience, I'm a fan of how serendipitous things turn out, and I try to feed some of that back into my work. I apologize if my videos have ever given you the illusion that I'm actually in any way smart. Stop by one of my streams sometime and I'll shatter that illusion in moments. Is this genuinely just what I'm meant to do over and over again? So to sum up, log every bit of footage I can for ease of finding later. Write down every errant thought and potential joke. Their quality does not matter. If they're good, great. If not, I at least got that out of my head. I never know what will wind up useful. Follow any leads on real-world topics as best I can and do some research. All the while, I'm making a plan in my head for how to tackle the upcoming video, imagining sections and notes to hit. So, let's get to writing. Games are fairly distinct from one another, so while I have general workflows, I try to make the video a best fit for the game at hand. For a mission-oriented title like Hooligans, I want to give each mission a topic, sometimes multiple, and I tend to do this by looking at what that mission either introduces, or if it introduces nothing, what that mission best emphasizes. Meanwhile, a free roamer like Saints Row is a lot less orderly, so I chunk the story into portions and thread topics through them. As it's called playing, I want the video to match the advancement of the game, though I'll bend or shift things around if it makes it easier to follow and doesn't misrepresent the game in a way which I feel is unfair to it. From that beginning, I use what I picked up on during note-taking, consider what I believe needs to be made a topic of discussion, and I make 2 last lists. One is basically taking inventory. I note down every subject about the game that is in any way important. It does not matter how obvious. Every mode of play, side activity, and standout story element or theme. This lets me have a quick reference guide for anything that may come up. Then I create a second ordered list, putting topics which make the cut in a sensible order to tackle them. This gives me a game plan, but I do not get locked down by it, and I will reshift on the fly if a better path emerges during scripting. Music in the Hooligans video came up way earlier than I had initially planned. Originally, I was going to have it in level 5 along with the visuals, but the lull in gameplay during level 2 felt like a suitable spot. It allowed me to lay out the game's atmosphere far earlier, and give some additional context to English hooliganism at an early point in the video where it still felt relevant enough to be a focus. Doing music in level 5 felt sensible because it fit with the other topic, the game's visuals, but it would have been distracting since the topic of hooliganism itself was long since settled. It would have felt like I was dragging it back kind of awkwardly. Meanwhile, the level aesthetics discussion maybe could have come later, as it covered the breadth of the game's locales before we had seen all of them. That one was a product of trying to find another place for it and not really having anywhere I could put it without making the level 5 portion incredibly anemic and overstuffing a different stage. Level 5 was a pretty level, so that felt like enough of a spark for the topic. It's not the best, but it was the best I could come up with. Level 2 also features this bit. Also, French viewers, can you just walk into a high street weapon shop and leave with a 9mm? Can a random English geezer named Bricks? This was meant to be a series of jokes over the course of the video. As I go to weapon shops in each country, the question goes more and more off the rails. It got cut because it escalated better in my head than it did in actual practice, though now I sort of regret not just rolling with that, as it may well have added to the journey aspect of the video. There's something of a tunnel vision which really opens up when you're done with a project and realize that thing that seemed like a really big issue, it probably would have been better to just go ahead with it. You never know, and hey, sandpaper only works because it's rough. Script writing is a fun nightmare, especially near the beginning. An intro has to lay the groundwork for what's to come while also being a promise that what's ahead is worth listening to. My first 1 or 2 days writing will basically just be trying to make an intro which doesn't feel like an awkward contrivance while promising that interesting journey ahead. Sometimes I find myself going back and rewriting it entirely midway through the script to make it better represent the way I feel the video is coming together. I want each topic to be an interesting segment onto itself while illustrative of a larger trend within the game, all the while connecting to what is around it. I tried to structure playing so that the early portions form a base of understanding, core game mechanics and pivotal story themes, conflicts, and concepts. Then I layer on top of that as I go on, getting into either more abstract topics or ones that benefit from prior knowledge. If I'm doing it right, it feels like things are always developing and I'm not losing people as I move into the more nuanced thoughts or feelings or advance an earlier understanding. I also try to make it so that while each section has a focus, I'm at least adding to a bigger picture view of the entire game and keeping it clear that just because I've stopped specifically talking about a certain thing does not mean it's no longer relevant. For the Saints Row video, I'm going to cover driving and combat very early on, so that as I get into activities which feature these activities, I can point out how these base mechanics are put to use. But I also intend to tie driving into the introduction of the mechanic and chop shop activities, so I'm trying to advance the game's story simultaneously and thread all of these elements together. Now, while my videos are lengthy, I do make an effort to make sure each topic moves along at a decent clip. For the pivotal subjects, I'll let myself go as long as I feel I need, but generally I try to keep each segment to a page or 2 at most so that the thoughts are kept at least a little bit breezy, and after that I need to move on to the next set of relevant points and let things develop. When I'm approaching a subject, I'll scan through my notes for anything relevant. If I'm writing about combat, say, post notes where I break down the systems, noteworthy gunfights which I've tagged with moment, typically, or any surrounding events, any observations or jokes I wrote down relating to the subject. I may even grab the more noteworthy notes and whack them onto another screen so I won't forget them. I tend to have an idea what I want to say long before I really get to note-taking, at least on most of the core subjects, but I take that time to let my thoughts percolate, to sharpen them up, to make sure I can get those thoughts out as best I can, add something unique, and make a few people laugh along the way. Despite how much stock I've seemingly put into my notes, I'm not bound to them obviously. They're a useful foundation and a chance to check my own assumptions, but I also don't want the videos to be dry and academic. I want them to have a more light-hearted conversational tone, at least for the most part. I want to toss out ideas. I don't want to be a tosser. While I'm writing, I'll also have stuff like jokes I think up pasted ahead of the script if I happen to think up something funny while I'm on the move. A lot of my own jokes tend to sneak up on me. Those are the ones I like the most, when even I have no idea how I thought of it. It's like there's a smarter, funnier person living in my own head, and occasionally he just kind of hands me something. I also love really spaced out setups and callbacks. As mentioned in my failed web series video, I try to make the setup and later payoff both funny individually so I don't feel like I'm wasting anyone's time. I begin each writing day by skim reading from the very start, doing light refinements, and seizing on opportunities to plant the seed of something. And the longer it takes for that seed to come back around, the happier I am. So, this isn't just one of the hardest games I've played. It's one of the hardest to get to play. It was tougher getting this bastard to run than a big lad 8 beers deep. Run! Run, you pillocks! Get moving! I got this game to run, Bolch. I can get you fucking running too. I kinda botched the delivery, unfortunately. I could have picked my words better to make this one clearer. My proudest one is probably the Yakuza 5 video, where I do a line that won't pay off for about 5 or 6 hours. This daily review of my work also lets me see if my points are getting too repetitive, lets me check if the early portions are appropriately building to the later ones, and conversely if the later ones are losing the thread or letting those earlier ideas wither. And yeah, I pretty much write like that until I hit the end. This and note-taking are by far and away the most time-consuming parts of the project. I don't flake on the other portions, but if I'm going to focus all of my effort on any one thing, it's going to be the writing. It's the most stressful and enjoyable part of what I do, playing games and writing about them. I still get a rush when a clever line comes to me or I feel I've really nailed something down about a subject and can't wait to share it. Everything else, that's a bit of a hangover. Okay, I do enjoy a bit of video editing, and the video itself coming out is a big reward. Well, that's everything I have to say on writing. The last time I did one of these, I also covered audio and video editing. I'm gonna go easy on that this time because I don't feel that's where my strengths really lie. I try to make the background footage back up what I'm talking about pretty much throughout, and try to limit repetitive usage of the same clips, though time to time it happens. I think it comes across sloppy and makes you look like you're not really putting your whole into the video if you have to repeat clips too often. I use HUD and UI elements to quickly scan through for relevant footage, though now I take the time to timestamp, this isn't as useful. On the previous video, YouTuber Toast of Fire showed me his method of using a spreadsheet, separating parts of his script into cells, and using clipping tools to prepare relevant footage ahead of time. I haven't adopted this myself besides making clips. While doing my proper note-taking, it could be worth grabbing standout moments which really exemplify certain topics, or otherwise strange moments so I can hold them in reserve and break them out as needed. It saves time hunting footage down the line. I've spoken to a lot of other creators since the last video, and there is no unified workflow. Whether or not yours is good is entirely dependent on if it works for you. If me breaking down my workflow has left you thinking that I'm at least a little bit insane, then I've done my job properly. But in my head, working this way is, well, it's working. Further proof of my insanity is that I've gone over to Adobe. If you want to get into video editing, don't give Adobe money, but the way I do it is I work until I try to do something I don't know how to do, then I Google how to do it, and then I do it. And over the years, I've learned a bunch. Mostly about how much I hate people who make tutorials. Audio-wise, I've picked up a habit of flicking after I make a mistake during narration. See? That's me thinking I could tell anyone about audio in the past. Or now, for that matter. This makes it a lot easier to spot flubs when I go on to clean the audio. There's now a wealth of free tools that are really good for each stage. For writing, I use Notepad for my quick notes, and then LibreOffice for actual scripting. Many other creators have gone to Google Docs, since that makes it easier to collaborate and have others check over your work before it's finalized. There's also an online tool called Word Counter. I use this to check for repetitive word use and trim down where possible. I also try to make sure the writing isn't too formal. If this thing tells me my language is that of a college graduate, I smack that twat down a little. Personally, I never send anyone my whole script, but I have friends check out bits and pieces when it comes to topics I feel are out of my depth, or I'm uncertain a thought makes sense to anyone but me. I'm not saying it's bad practice to have people review your work. A second set of eyes that you trust can be invaluable. I just tend to be too impatient to want to wait around on others, and given the length of my videos, I feel like it would be asking way too much of someone else's time. For games capture, I use OBS and NVIDIA's GeForce Experience, formerly Shadowplay. AMD has Radeon Relive, which apparently does just as well. I do not miss the days of DX Tori and especially Fraps. I tried recently looking into an internal capture card so I could record more games at 4K 60 FPS without taxing the computer, but a friend told me I lack the space for it, so we'll just stick with what we've got for now. While I want it, I do not believe 4K would really make the videos that much better. Something I've picked up from working in trailer capture for the last few years is that even if we get a request for a 1080p deliverable, we'll still capture 4K so we can punch in the footage without losing quality. I'd honestly say 4K is stupid overkill for most people, and this is the only real benefit I've ever felt for it. I still haven't decided if the new Saints Row video will be my first proper 4K playing episode, or if it will go 1080p and I'll just take that extra flexibility. I have GIMP for image manipulation. I've moved on from Audition in terms of audio, but it still exists and is a workhorse. And on the video editing front, DaVinci Resolve is free and has made some waves. I personally can't speak for how good it is as I've never used it. I'm stuck in Adobe's garden. And yet I don't use Photoshop. That's pretty much all I have to say. I hope this has been interesting and maybe even helpful. To anyone who wants to start making stuff, don't worry about having every step perfected first try. Just go for it and figure out what works for you along the way. You'll always be figuring out new solutions and polishing your ideas. And looking back on a finished product gives you the most to learn from. Despite how much I put into my videos, I avoid perfectionism because it's unhealthy and prohibitive. Do the best you can and be proud of what you make, but also keep an eye out for things to improve, flaws you'll move on from. Don't get stuck thinking you've got it all figured out, because that's the first step towards growing bored of what you do. Anyway, Saints Row 2022 will be a lot less inspirational than that, so see you soon. Hey everyone, this is a brief update I'm whacking on the end of this video, which I hope you've enjoyed. I want to plug a podcast I've joined as an occasional co-host, Bullet Time. It's me and a mate, James, Hot Cider, going over old, mostly forgotten, janky FPS games from the last few generations. I'm on the episode for Black, and we'll be covering 50 Cent Blood on the Sand with Heavy Eyed. Me and James are also working on a Free Radical sub-series, which will be starting in February of next year. We've so far had guests Mr. Hammers, Mini-Me, and Purposeless Rabbit Holes, and it's been just a lot of fun to record, to kind of just cut back and talk some old games. Doing this has had me wanting to do a video series breaking down Free Radical game by game when that sub-series is done, and it's just been such a lovely excuse to revisit some old games and play some oldies I never got around to. Speaking of not getting around to stuff, I made this post at the start of the year. I want to say I still intend to do all of these videos besides the VR Melee comparison. I just cannibalized too many points in other videos and it kind of withered. The Pure Ownage video I still really want to do because it was a big part of my teenage years and I never see anyone really talk about it these days. And then I pushed it behind Yakuza and that video was really, really big. And then I found my old screenplays and I thought, hey, I should use these for practice. And then I made that video instead of working on Pure Ownage. And, new things just kept piling up. Meanwhile, Brigade, I have recorded 30-40 hours of that game and still haven't beaten it. It is extremely difficult. And I still want to cover it because it's very interesting. As for playing Sonic Adventure wrong, the reason that's been pushed so far back is really stupid on my end, and I do apologize for this. People immediately knew what the gimmick for Adventure 1 would be, and I sort of panicked. It took me longer than the 5 seconds it should have done to realize that it's not my job to outsmart the audience or throw them a curveball. It was in fact a good thing they knew exactly what was coming, because, yeah, that's the answer. That's the wrong way to play it. So, yeah, that was really dumb on my end. But there is also a more legit issue behind all of that, which I'm worried I can't make it nearly as interesting as the first part. I am very proud of a lot of that video. There's parts I might rejigger when I do the full thing, just bits of wording here and there where I want to be a bit more clear and change around a few things I say. But for the most part, I'm really, really happy with that video. And I really should just get on with adventure and get on and do it. It's as I said on the video itself with perfectionism and such. I should trust my gut, say it, and it probably will be interesting to others. Thoughts that sit in your own head become less interesting because they're obvious to you, and you never know how obvious they are to others. So, yeah, I'm just going to go in, do what the audience, kind of expects on Sonic Adventure 1, and try to make it worth their while regardless. I feel especially guilty in regards to playing Adventure On because I got another YouTuber to make a video for that part, and he finished it in the fucking summer. So, yeah, I've got to get on that. In general, I just should not announce plans because I am way too impulsive. I tend to follow and do what I'm interested in at that exact moment in time. That said, I made those promises and I intend to fulfill them. So yeah, I say I intend to fulfill my promises. I say as I work on a video that wasn't promised, this being this and Saints Row 2022. Look, I'm a Saints Row fan, and this game just left me with so many thoughts that I have to get out there. I want that video done before the end of the year, and so I'm gonna go get back to working on that full time. So I hope to see you all soon.